start
Okay.
it from.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, if there's
Um,
a question that doesn't fall in your domain, I could just, we can just send, let's move on to next question.
uh,
Nothing.
yeah, absolutely. Stop me, by the way, anytime if you have any question. I'm totally fine with that. So my name is Stern, and so I work right now as a data developer at WestJet, which is the second biggest airline in Canada, and I think the ninth right now in North America. So I work as a data developer slash data engineer. It's literally the same in our team. And so mainly right now, the project that I've been working on is usually we're doing the migrations of the data from our old on-prem databases, and we are right now moving it to the cloud. So that's mainly, I would say, 90% of the project that I'm working on at WestJet right now. Yeah, and I also have backgrounds in data science, but somehow I transitioned to data engineering. Yeah, but I feel like it's all the same as long as you are within the data pipeline. Yeah, it's all good. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for a quick introduction. So, I mean, you already, started the point, right? So you transitioned from data science to data engineering. So you can start from there. So how did that transition happen?
Right. When I was in school, so I went to school and at SAIT, which is our institute, Institute of Technology here in Alberta, so Southern East Alberta Institute of Technology. I did machine learning. I was mainly interested in that since 2018 when deep learning was booming. Everybody was talking about it. People were creating some bots that were playing GTA 5. And that's where really started I was interested. I was like, what is this new thing? Because I had already background in computer science. And I just was curious. And then I found out that it's another new world in machine learning, because also it's a bit different from traditional coding, I would say. And then after I graduated from the school, that's when I was looking for a job, actually. And then during that period, I was looking for a job. I found out that really data engineering is actually, you cannot do data science without data engineering, because when you're in school, you usually use the data sets that are already clean for you, like those ones on Kaggle or on Google data sets, right? But that's just one part of the data. You're literally starting from here, but there's another new whole world of data engineering this on the upstream side. And I figured out that you really can't do data science without data engineering. They kind of go hand in hand. And that's when I was like, hey, yeah, it's still in the data pipeline. And I got an offer as a data engineer. And as long as I know I'm working with data scientists, I was totally fine with that. And I decided to transition into data engineering. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting journey, right?
Yeah.
And then,
So, sorry.
yeah,
Yeah. So, did you like apply for a data engineering role, or like were you offered a data engineering role?
I did apply for a data engineering role at that time, but it wasn't really clear because they were calling it data developer, right? It wasn't really clear. It's actually during the interview time that I had to ask more question about it, and I got to understand all the tasks that I will be doing. Yeah, that's when I found out that it's more data engineering. Yeah.
The data, right? Like it's in many different domains, right? There are so many things that now companies are doing in all the different domains, and airline being one of those industries, right? So how is data science utilized in the airline industry?
Right. That's a pretty good question. Um, there are many use cases actually of AI in the airline industry that I got to find out with the time I've been working at WestJet. So there's this project that I was working on a couple of months ago, actually, that I think that would be like the first use case of AI that is obvious. it will be like flight delay prediction. So predicting if there will be delays due to different circumstances. So the features that were used during that project was like the weather data, right? So we kind of enrich what the data that we already had with other third-party data, like the weather data in Calgary or any other airport, as a matter of fact. But that's one of the use case. So knowing, is this plane going to depart 15 minutes later or 20 minutes later, so that we can know the customer ahead of time that there will be delay. It's usually best to know the customer ahead of time than the customer finding out at the airport that there is a delay, right? So that's one of the use case of the data science in the airline industry. Another use case would be the flight operations, which is mainly predicting or coming up with the best aircraft route between two airports, right? Just trying to minimize the fuel consumptions, because you want to take, the pilots want to take the shortest route between the two airport, but sometimes it doesn't go as planned because of different reasons. It can be the wind, it can be clouds, right? It can be turbulence. All that also can help, find the best path. Another use case of data science I would think of is also would be to enhance the customer experience, right? Especially during the time where there is like irregular operation. There's something in the airline industry called irregular operations. That's when there's like a peak, or when there's like disturbance. Let's say last December, there have been some weather disturbance all across Canada, right? So there's a lot of cancellation of flights, a lot of delays. So customer would call to the call center, and usually it will be super busy, right? People will have to wait for 2-3 hours. So how can we enhance that with maybe coming up with great chatbots, right? That are trained maybe using generative AI that can literally help the customer in the meantime, because most of those inquiries the customer have might be something small that takes 2-3 minutes, right? But of course, there might be also other cases when the case of the customer is a bit complex. Then they will need, that person needs to talk to a human. But those small other cases could be handled by intelligent bot. Another use case I will also think about using data science in airline would be predictive maintenance. So somehow predicting if aircraft component is going to fail, right? To know when it might fail. And in the airline industry is a very critical industry where stuff like that is really taken very seriously, because it can cost life, right? So predictive maintenance as well is another use case of artificial intelligence in the airline industry.
So
Yeah.
I mean, given any questions, Prashant? Was it you?
Yeah.
Or-
Right.
So
Yeah.
in the first use case that you told about, which is the delay prediction, right? So like, what kind of features do you take in
For the first use case, you mean the flight?
delay prediction?
The delay prediction, yeah. So I said the weather data, we can enrich that. What other feature you can say if they're connecting flight as well, that can also create some delays, because passenger might have it's called some passenger might have the same flight connecting, right? The other flight needs to wait for the other passenger from another flight for them to depart. That also might be that how many people are connecting with that flight. Crew member as well, because themselves, they need to transfer from one aircraft to the other one. Also different other processes that happens during the airports, right? So sometimes there are especially during peak season, that's what I was talking about the IRO. Things really get busy at the airport. That also can contribute to the disruption and the delay. But most of the time is the weather, I would say.
Got it.
Yeah.
Kind of same question for the price prediction, like
Mhm.
how you optimize the prices for the end user.
Pretty good question. That's called dynamic pricing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, there's definitely that. So we probably most of the airlines in North America, they will use that process called dynamic pricing, which will analyze the demand, right? So let's say how many people are booking for this summer, right? With that, we can know how many people are traveling, right? And so looking at that, also, there are also third-party data that you can get from vendors like Sibo, like Adobe, all that. You can combine all that information to have an idea of how will how many people will be traveling in a few months or in a few years as well. We could also use real-time data from the competitor as well, right? I know there's another airline that used to web scrape. It's created a lot of issues with them, but yeah, you could also do that. So analyze the pricing of competitors also to come up with better pricing in order to compete with the competitor as well. Yeah.
So does the airline pay for like two other companies? If you know, there are so many different websites, right? Booking.com, then there's cheap
Mhm.
flight. So, people who are booking from there, obviously the data, it's held by them, right? So
Mhm.
does the
Mhm.
airline pay to them in order to get the data, or?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. So most of the data, of course, is transmitted to the airline because if somebody go to Kayak or Booking.com and go buy the ticket there, the information somehow or another needs to get transmitted to the airline, right? But it's not all the data that is transmitted to the airline, right? Just the necessary data. There's something called PNR, which is it's an acronym. It's more of like a code. It's a 6-digit code of each passenger at that specific flight, right? It's that information that is actually sent to the airline, but the rest of the information can be stored, can be kept by booking.com for their own analysis as well. But most of the time, it's just the information that the airline needs that is transmitted. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, because I was wondering about the pricing, right? Because the pricing that you guys set, right? The other booking.com, let's say for an example, they are
Right.
providing an additional discount on the pricing that you guys are originally set, right?
Mhm.
So that data is completely, different than the data that you would have because the price are different, right? So then how do you
Right.
have to take that into account? Like how isn't that's going to bring your original price lower for future prices? Because the
Right.
original price you guys are setting versus the prices that they're setting, which are much lower, right? Than the
Mhm.
forecast that you guys are gonna be doing, it's going to
Mhm.
include the pricing that they have set, right? So
Right.
then in turn, the airline is actually providing the price at a much lower rate than they were supposed to if they were solely using their own data, right?
That's a pretty good case. I don't know if you heard about it. So we had a similar incident some weeks back, right? Where some customer had bought a very cheap flight, right? I think it was like a one-way to London and then coming back, and then ended up being canceled, right? Stuff like that, it happens, right? Because it can be some discrepancy between the information that is being shared between those I usually like to call them like middlemen, right? Because like middlemen, literally, and the airlines, right? But some of them do have actually partnership, right? Let's say if I had to think about it, like Kayak and Ryanair, I think they have some sort of partnership, so you can get discounted price from Kayak, but it's very specific to airlines. They need to have like some sort of partnership or agreement for them to have a discounted price. But most of the time, I would say especially here in Canada, in the airline industry here in Canada, you won't find much of a discount. It's usually in Europe that you find vast difference between the amount that you see on the airline website and on those third-party or middleman website. Yeah.
In terms of the data, right? Because you're a data engineer, obviously you have to deal with, huge amount of data, right? So how do you guys handle such a vast amount of data that's coming from, for example, if we take in a maintenance, right? There are
Right.
so many devices on the aircraft that's collecting tons and tons of data. And, WestJet, let's say, if there are 100,000 aircraft, right? So then that's a very vast amount of data, right? So how do you guys actually get the data, and how do you guys handle the entire process, the entire pipeline, let's say from start to the end, where a data scientist can easily access that data rapidly, right?
Right. Pretty good question there. Actually, there's a ton of data that the aircraft generates, for its own operation and also for business operation as well. And as you know, every 2 years, pretty much the amount of data that is being produced, even in the airline industry, even on the internet, doubles. And it's the same thing. Newer aircraft, let's say the Boeing 737 Max, they will produce, they will have more sensors, they will have more technology, they'll produce more data than the older versions. That's how it is. So I wish it found out that it's actually, we reached that point where the on-prem databases that we had actually reached the limit, right? That's why the reason why you see most of the airlines, even if you look at the American airlines, they're moving their data to more of a scalable platform, let's say like Snowflake, right? Where it's easier to scale as more data comes in. But because when you have on-prem, data, you're only limited by the amount of space that you have, right? And adding more, it's not easily scalable, right? So that's why most of the data that right now we are receiving, that we will be also receiving, we have a very deep partnership with Snowflake. So all our data lakes, all our data mark are currently in the process of being migrated to, to the cloud-based platform like Snowflake.
And what are if you were to list out, some of the tools that you use on day-to-day basis as a data developer?
Right.
And also, what are the different skill sets that's required for each of those tools? And also, do you do a bit of DevOps, because data engineers also do a bit of DevOps and stuff?
Right. So the tools that we use, like personally, I use a lot of Python and SQL. So SQL, like the Snowflake flavor, I would say, which is pretty similar to SQL Server. And we also have proprietary tools within WestJet for the ETL process. So that, and we also have another team within our team that deals with real-time data, right? So that's the team of the data application. So those usually use Kafka and all those libraries for the real-time data. So the skill set, I would say Python always the best, is always the one to go with. Anything that has to do with data, I think Python really champ it up, and also SQL as well. Those ones, I think those are the two main, those are like the prerequisite, right? Because as I was telling you, also as you become a developer, as you advance, you understand that you need to go on a more of a learn on a need basis, right? You cannot learn everything when you're starting out. You just found out that with more projects you have to take, the more you are required to learn a new specific tool, a new specific language and all that. And I figured out that's actually very good, because when I was starting out, I was overwhelmed by how many things I had to learn, how many frameworks I need to learn, which is crazy. But beside that, I would say so. And on my team, we also have DevOps. So their specific work is actually providing support as a DevOps. So my work is only focused on data engineering.
Cool. You guys have any
Yeah.
questions? Shant, shit.
Yeah. So let's say a fresher like who has just graduated from college, he wants to get into like your role, let's say. So what he or she should focus on, and how can he get to where you are?
Yeah. So what I would say, first of all, is to have the fundamentals right. It might be boring, but anything fundamentals are very important. Here, fundamentals, I'm talking in terms of data structure and algorithm. And if you want to go into machine learning and deep learning and data science, just the fundamentals, right? The linear regression, statistics, just the normal things, right? Just start from there, because it's hard to go on deeper and more advanced concepts if you don't get your fundamentals right? And I'll also add on top of that, obviously, is to learn SQL and Python. But with that, I think that's enough, right? That's enough to just get you started. And then if you like if that person is still in college, I think, and that's something I wish I would have done more when I was back in college, would be to start working on project, build project as much as you can, put it on GitHub, document the project, have a blog. If not, you can have a good README as well on GitHub. And also to add on the project to work on, I would say pick a project that really interests you, right? Not just any generic project. Let's say Iris data set or the Boston house price, those are very generic to Titanic and all that. Just pick something that is, very important to you, because when you work on a project that you're passionate about, or if it is a problem that you're actually passionate about, it shows, right? The amount of output, how you carry on the project, it just shows. And I think that's something very, very important that many people don't mention about. And just add also extra on that, if you can use the data set, maybe you use an API in order to fetch the data set, or maybe use your own data, right? Let's say I saw somebody who was working on a recommender system using his own Spotify data as well, that stands out, right? And when you're a fresher, that's the thing you need to stand out, so that when you got the interview, the employee is like, wow, yeah, so I see passion, I see determination, I see, and it's also easier to talk about it when you have passion for it, and also you stand out.
And I think so we at data production also are like big proponents of this. So anyone who asks for any like directions in data science, so we always guide them towards projects. So once you are clear with basics of Python and SQL, so I think projects are the best way to like accelerate your learnings. Yeah.
That's true. It's actually, as human, we usually learn by doing, and actually even retain better by teaching as well. That's why I was saying having also a blog also helps. Yeah.
So I see you write blogs, right? So let's talk about that. So how did you get started writing blogs? And what's the approach, right? I mean, I always want, like, people
Right.
write here and lengthier blogs, and like putting it together, it's what takes a lot of time, right? So how do you decide on what to write, and how do you decide on the context that goes into the blog post?
Right.
And expect the reader to stick with the blog post up to the end, right?
Mhm.
So let's talk
Pretty
about
good.
that.
Yeah, that's a pretty good question right there. I would say blog myself. I just blog to share what I'm learning, to share what I have just found out, right? Because that's usually how it sticks, right? There's something called the Feynman technique. That's what I was talking a couple of minutes ago. So it's more of you remember more what you teach, right? So coming up with the ideas of what to work on, I just feel like when I started the blog, it was 2018, and I will never forget that. I thought you need to be an expert for you to start writing blogs, right? And I figured out, no, actually it's not, because there's usually something that somebody else doesn't know, right? It might be just a simple basic thing. Let's say an if statement. If you can explain it in a simple words, just put it on a blog, explain to somebody who might just be interested in reading it, because another thing I figured out as human, once we know something, we feel like another person already know that thing. So we don't do much effort to kind of explain. We just assume, oh, probably the other person already know it, right? But I found out that most of the time the other person doesn't know. And then just writing down helps the other person as well learn something new, right? And also it also helps also solidify what you just learned. In terms of coming up with what you really what topics to write, I would say that's one way to come up with. Another way that I just figured out recently is actually these days I use ChatGPT, right? I just prompt it and then it gives me some brainstorming ideas, right? It's really interesting to see how ChatGPT is very creative in that sense, right? So it can give you like a step-by-step ways to write about it. And then that also helps me out if I'm learning something new, just to solidify, go through it, ask questions, just having somebody who is super intelligent, who's just close to you. But now what you don't need to do is just to copy paste the whole thing and then paste it on your blog, because then you haven't understood anything. So you need to come up with your own words, your own way of explaining it. That's how I think you take advantage of having a blog and also sharing, putting your brand there. I feel like that would be the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, and given, these days, right, there's so many data scientists, they're writing blogs on a similar topic over and over again. Like one thing that I've noticed is, try to be more creative and more engaging rather than, writing a really simple blog. Maybe create animations or infographics and so on and so forth, right? So then, the people will prefer your blog versus, the other person's blog, who's just a bunch of text. That's it. There's nothing else there, right? That's the other thing I've learned, right? Because every time I start writing blog, I'm like, well, if I'm writing this blog, someone has already wrote it, right? So why
Right.
would a person read my blog, right? But then if I add this creativity, like animations and all those sort of things, then obviously it's much more effective, right? Um,
Yeah.
the other question is, did that help you with your, with your professional uh journey, like writing blogs, sharing it on LinkedIn? Like how valuable is it to, put this out there to public, especially when you're looking for jobs?
It is super, super valuable. I mean, I would say it helps you out stand out. As I was replying to Ashit's questions, right? It's the main thing, especially if you're starting out, the main thing it's just think about it. It's just like a triangle like this. At the bottom, at the entry level, there are many people who are competing the same job. So the more you get experience, the less people you have to compete for jobs, right? So when you're still starting out, it's important to stand out. It is important to do something that makes you different when a recruiter look at your resume, because usually they say a recruiter spend only 10 seconds looking at your resume, right? That's after passing the ATS, first of all. And they spend only 10 seconds looking at it. So you need to make sure that you stand out, right? You need to make sure that, hey, looking at the resume, first things first name right there, and then there's a blog. how many people who have applied to that specific job have a blog, a link to their blog? I would guess less than 3% or 5%. And right there, you just grab the attention of the recruiter right there. And that's the thing you need to do, is just to stand out. How do you stand out? It has helped me out tremendously. I can say that as WestJet, it also helped me out during the interview time, because they would just go through my blog, read the project I have read, and then we found out that the interview is more of talking about the work that I have done. And it's so much easier, especially on the person who is looking for a job, because it just removes all that anxiety, that anxiety that is right there during the interview. It's just so much easier, makes the whole process very easy. So I would say it's, if you really want to stand out, it's a great way to stand out for sure.
Any questions, guys?
So, like, if someone wants to read your blog, so like, what are like your best blogs? We can put the link in the description of this video.
Right.
So if you can tell, like, what are how many blogs have you written till now?
Written on my blog?
Yeah.
I probably have
Just sharing my
yeah.
screen.
Oh, you're sharing. Okay, so I probably have around 20 or something. I haven't been very active, but one of the blogs that I really like to recommend is the Demystify Machine Learning. There's also the end-to-end. Yeah, this one I like it, but the end-to-end is more of an end-to-end machine learning project. It's a very long blog, and probably the best way to go about it is just to go in parts of it, but it goes through the whole data science life cycle, so cleaning the data, exploiting the data, pre-processing, and all of that. And then I try to explain as if I'm explaining to somebody who doesn't know anything. And I also try to comment my code as much as I can. But usually it's those blogs that are not very technical that I found out that most people like to read. So like, as you were mentioning, it was just those blogs that usually have like graphs, just usually short blogs. That's the format that I will be doing in the upcoming months. There's a blog that I'm planning to publish probably in 2 weeks or so. Yeah, so mainly I would say this blog post I would recommend to anybody who wants to learn how to go from the data to deploying a model. So yeah. And then the demystify.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and then the demystify machine learning is more of somebody who doesn't understand what it is, machine learning. So I try to explain it in like easy to understand language, not using any jargon or something like that.
Yeah, I think I spent a bit of time, reading this blog here when I was, first I was planning on, inviting you, and it's really good, explaining putting it out there, explaining all the metrics, and this is what I was talking about, right? Putting some chart so that's easier to explain than putting an actual examples, right? Doing the examples by hand, and showing it how things work, right? Because people do everything using just programming, right? So, but if you calculate things, then example like these, then how the metric works, what's going on, and so on and so forth, right? So
exactly.
Yeah, this bug is good. I mean, I didn't read the complete this is pretty long, 19 minutes, but
yeah.
So
yeah.
No,
yeah, it is something that I'm actually trying to change. I'm doing smaller version of it. So like, let's say 5-minute blogs, and then maybe a blog, break it down into different blogs. I think it will be easier to digest than having long blogs. That's something also I will be working on as well.
I think the end-to-end project blog is like really detailed.
Yeah, it was like every screenshot and all.
Yeah, I think you must have spent, I think, months on it, right?
Actually, no. Actually, that's what I was saying. Like, if you really I remember this post, I published it, it was like 4 a.m. in the morning. And I was working on it the whole night. So that's what I was telling you about. So if you really love something, if you really have a passion about the problem you're solving, you just don't even count the time you're working on it. Time just flies, right? You're just working, you just feel like working, even forget about eating. So that's why it's very important to work on project that really spark your passion.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we can put these two blogs links in the description.
Sure.
So I have one question, like related
Sure.
to the project. Let's
Right.
assume you are in the college and you want to do something, a project related to data engineering. And
Mhm.
so the question is what it would be. And another thing is like what the journey you will follow, like from learning the Python, from learning the deployment process, or all these things. So what you will try to do at that time of.
Right. So if I had to start again, so I will first start with the problem, right? You need to come up with a problem and you need to come up with a solution, right? Code is all about just trying to solve a problem using code. That's it, right? And another thing is that with this type of project, usually it's a huge project to just start it out like that and then start coding, right? The first thing somebody needs to do actually before starting a project is not actually to start writing code, is to sit down, break down the whole thing into small pieces, right? Let's say in this case, if I had to restart to do the same project, I will say, okay, so where do I get the data? First of all, okay, how do I get at the data? Okay, after gathering the data, what programming language should I use? What framework should I use? What library should I use? Okay, once you figure out that, okay, and now what are the steps for me to come up with a deployed model, right? That's when you break it down. So you start with exploratory data analysis, data processing, data wrangling, right? Cleaning the data and all that. And then you go step by step. I usually like to go step by step. It just makes the whole thing so much, manageable. They say if you want to eat an elephant, you start with one bite, right? So the same way, and then you're also going to reiterate the first version that's going to be put out there won't be the best, maybe not the best model, right?
Yeah.
And then you go back to it and then you reiterate, you improve, right? And then you put it out there. And also you try also to get feedbacks from other people. I try to get as much feedbacks for this project as I can. And I figured out certain things that I had assumed was okay, wasn't actually okay, which is also great to have a community. That's why I actually like this type of podcast, because this creates a community of people. If you get stuck, you can ask somebody else, right? You create that sense of community of sharing the knowledge as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then I think the other question I had, like related to, finding a data from the airline industry. So is there any open source where one could, go grab the data from the airline industry and do some sort of analysis?
Right, that's a pretty good question. So usually airline data are not open source, right? So you will find some data on cargo and all that, but usually won't be like the up-to-date data, right? Because that's what gives airlines their competitive advantage, right? So most of the data are not open source, but you could try to work with just the data that you have, right? With, let's say, somebody who is passionate about the airline, you can start to work with the data that is on cargo, right? Usually that data is not representative of the real world data because that one is really clean and all that. But I feel like that's a good start, right? And if on your resume, if there's somebody who's interested in the airline industry and on your resume, you have, express interest in the airline industry and you have worked on projects and data that is related to the airline industry, I think that will help, that would definitely help. I used credit card data and I was able to get the job, right? So of course, as long as you show passion, right? You show passion, you show that you love doing all the work, because that's what shows the type of person you will be at work, right? If you just show passion. So I would say start with what you have right now. You don't need any fancy data, and start working on project. Yeah.
I think I had another question which I completely forgot what I had.
No worries.
Question. How many people actually read? So this is a question for everyone, right? Because I'm curious to know. So like Netflix, Booking.com, Uber, they have this their own like that. Even DoorDash, they have this their own blogs of data engineering, machine learning engineering, and so on. How many people actually read those blogs here? So they
Yeah,
have their entire architecture and in-depth, very in-depth blogs. So do people read that?
I used to. Airbnb have, I think they have an amazing blog, right? Where they actually go in details on breaking down their processes, some of the object detection that they use, how Airbnb come up with the price, right? So of the picture of the houses and all that. I used to work on one of the projects and they used YOLO. I'm not sure if you know YOLO. Yeah. So yeah, they use YOLO. Yeah, exactly. That's DoorDash, right? So but they really have some details blog right there, and it has really helped me out for sure. It's really detailed as well. Not sure if Ashit, do you have any other suggestion right there, or Sushan?
so yeah, I used to read them also, like for right now in my case, very few blogs are there, like Netflix has, and they mostly use reinforcement learning. So right now we are not using that in our day to.
Right.
So it not, but when I was in retail business, I used to a lot go into the details of the Swiggy and Instacart blogs. They have really nice blogs on recommendations systems.
So I think I mostly read blogs like whenever I wanted to understand a concept deeply. So that is the only, because back then there didn't used to be many like YouTube videos on some concepts. So but there were very detailed blogs on those topics. So that was when I started reading blogs. But yeah, so in the recent times there hasn't been any like topic that I wanted to read about, so I didn't uh, check up on any blog as such. But yeah, soon.
So
Yeah,
you're more of a read on a need basis, sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually making a habit of trying to read at least 1 or 2 blogs a week on Medium, just on Medium, right? And like these engineering blogs, they're very in detail and in depth, and I feel like there's just so much that one can learn and apply it at their own workplace, or even if they're going to be applying to those companies, it's very valuable, I feel, right? So yeah, I think it's a habit that takes time to get into, right?
Right. There's on Medium now. You mentioned about Medium. There's I would say like a Medium section of it called Toward Data Science. You know it, right? Yeah, I think that I've read, like, most of the time I'll get stuck. I need to find out something, and usually when I Google, that will be like the first link.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Medium is popular, right? And even towards that data science thing, that's actually embedded in Medium itself. So I feel that's why they always show up at the top when anyone Googles them. But yeah, it's interesting. I know I started reading some engineering blogs of other companies because they have different strategies and different ways of doing things. And there are technologies that one might not use at their own company, let's say. Then, like I don't use Snowflake.
Mhm.
We don't use Databricks. We are going to use Databricks now, but as of now, we
Mm.
don't use it. So all those sort of things, which you don't get exposed to until you read other people's blogs, and
Yeah.
spend a lot of time reading, best practices blogs, actually, like software engineering best practices. I spend a lot of time reading those blogs. Right?
Mm. Do you think it really helped you out along the way? So with
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like software engineering blogs. I mean, there are certain things that I come across. And because you subscribe to Medium, you get a email every single day with with this stuff, highlighted topics, and I look
right.
at it. If I find something interesting, and if I can see that that's gonna help my team at my work, then I'll go ahead and I read it, and I try to replicate it at work. Right? We are strong like believers in software engineering principles, like following software engineering principles at work. That's how we maintain everything, and that's how all of our pipelines and everything is designed.
Mm.
Designed in a way that it can be long lasting, right? And anyone who joins our team, we also ask them to, we get them up to a speed, ask them to follow the same strategy that we have, right?
Mm.
So that's the reason why I read a lot of posts, and I've used them at work. Actually, I've used tons and tons of stuff that I read, that I follow. I just apply it at work. That's how I get experience, right? So
Right.
there are people who are not aware about it. Then what we do is we run like tutorial sessions once or twice a month, where we all all data scientists get together, and then a
Mhm.
person sharing everything that they have come across and how they can utilize it to the projects. So maybe take that tool, apply it to the project that they've been doing at work, and see
Mm.
how it can be an advantage to others, right?
Mm.
And that's how everyone like sort of grows together. Everyone's learning and everyone's on the same boat and growing together, right?
Mm.
So like having that at work is, I find it very valuable, right? Having that environment and working in that environment, right? Because you're not just going there doing 9 to 5 job and just come back home. There is no growth in your career. There's no growth in your
Mm.
skill sets. And at the end of the day, let's say you have 4 or 5 years of experience and you're still stuck there, right?
Mm.
You haven't jumped up the ladder. You're just there. Then it's just, I find it waste, right? It's been 4 or 5 years.
Right.
What the doing, right?
That's so true.
Lot of things.
Especially if you accumulated some non-transferable skills, like something that is specific to a company that is
Yep.
not widely used in the industry, yeah, I feel like that would be, yeah, it's like a waste of time for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And
Yeah.
industry is something that will teach you more than your school, right? The amount of
Right.
time spent in the school, 3 to 4 years,
Yeah.
it's compared to even if you spend a year in industry, right?
Mm.
That's the other thing.
Yeah. I feel like that's also another curse about the IT industry. First of all, you need to keep on learning all the time, right? And also another thing, you also found out that the technology that some of the schools might teach, right? If you're not somebody who wants to keep up to date, that technology, by the time even you graduate, that technology is not even in use within the industry. So being especially like in the data space, I think continuous learning as well is something very important that everybody needs to embrace.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Any other questions? Anyone?
No, I think that's it.
Do you have any questions for us, Darren?
Uh, yeah, I'm actually a little bit interested about I have a question for you too. So I know you work for Decathlon, right? Decathlon?
Yep.
Okay. So how I have an idea on how could use like data science and all that, but how do you use it specifically for you for your work? How do you solve problem with it at work?
So, I mean, most of the stuff it's based off clients, right? So let's say, a client requires something, right? So, for example, I do for a lot of forecasting.
Right.
So we have an entire team, and the whole team it's divided into little bubbles. Okay, so we
Mhm.
have a group, 3 to 4 people assigned to data request. So what are data requests? So data requests are something, let's say a supply team comes to you and they be like, hey, I need this information. I want to know, um, you know, how many customers who bought gift card from this particular store, how many
Mhm.
people have actually used those gift card and in which stores, right? And how many
Mhm.
people are signing up for membership, right? So these are the
Mhm.
sort of data that we collect, right? And this has nothing to do with machine learning, right? This is mostly,
Mhm.
getting hold of the right data, analyzing it, mostly
Mhm.
SQL query. Everything is done in SQL query, right? So we have a data request team where, such kind of request we get from marketing, supply, operations team, and all of those people, right? Um, so we handle those kind of requests, and then we have a group for recommendation systems.
Right.
Because it's a e-commerce, we are pretty solid on the recommendation system. So every country, because Decathlon is spread across so many different countries, every
Right.
single country, has a like France team is the biggest, largest data science team. It's the hub. So
Mhm.
they have their own recommendation system. We in Canada built our own recommendation systems,
Mhm.
and then we compare. We see which one beats, right? And right now it's a Canadian one, which sort of beats the French team. So our recommendation system is then, used by other countries. And then we help them get up to the speed. We share them ideas, what we're doing, how our recommendation system works, and all that. So there's a dedicated team for that. And then we have a team.
Mhm.
I mean, it's not really a team, it's only me who does I take in charge of forecasting. So I do,
Mhm.
there's something called store piloting. So basically, you know, I predict the forecasted turnovers for the bunch of products. So, you can imagine I'm doing hundreds and hundreds of time series
Mhm.
for stores that's already open where we have the data, right? And the stores that are not open or that's been open only for a month, we don't have enough data to do the forecasting, right? And in that
Mhm.
case, strategies. So the way that I sort of work with these sort of things is, we get a request, I take that request, I start with an MVP product, right?
Mhm.
So get hold of the right amount of data. If it's an algorithm that needs to be designed in-house, such as for the store piloting thing, then,
Mhm.
me and my boss, we sit down, we speak to the store leaders, get their intuition about how, the products are getting sold, how they are making their turnover. Based off
Mhm.
that, just come up with some equations, and then we start implementing those. And the first
Right.
step is always an MVP product, right? So I get
Mhm.
a request, I get hold of the data, I quickly build something, and I give it to them. Right? That's the
Right.
first step. I send them an email. I'll be like, hey, here are the results. And then I ask them, do they want those results every single week? Right? If it's a recurring. If they say yes, then I'll be like, okay, I'm gonna either convert it to an email reports, then
Mhm.
I can automate the process. So every single week, the email gets sent out. Right? Now let's say, and this always happens, right? So we have web traffic stats that I used to send to a couple of store leaders. And
Mhm.
store leaders, they talk to each other and they share and they're like, hey, this is really valuable. Like I want it for my own store as well. Right. Then there are a
Mhm.
couple more other stores that gets added to the list and so on and so forth. Right. So now I have 5 to 6 different stores whom I'm sending the reports to, right, for their own specific store data.
Mhm.
Then now what I do is I'd be like, okay, you know what? This email thing, it's, instead of sending them out an email every single week, why not convert it into a dashboard? Right? Then I communicate with them. I'll be like, hey, would you prefer a dashboard where, you can filter through the different dates? With the
Mhm.
email report, it's restricted because I'm only going to provide you last week's analysis. Whereas if
Right.
I create a dashboard, you have entire timeline, right? You can play around with it. You get the weekly analysis, you get monthly metrics, you can get yearly metrics, right? Then I
Mhm.
automate the entire process. So we have a pipeline. Then I have to build the entire process such that, that's been automated. And now we have a dashboard which I communicate with them, right? And then every single week I gotta keep track of it, right? Because the pipeline runs every single week. So Monday morning is usually the time where I go through every single pipeline, see everything ran, or if there are any issues, look at the numbers, right? And that's the other thing, right? You as a data scientist, having put things into production, your job is not done, right? You also have to make sure the numbers are right, right? Sometimes I get, like I put so much things into production, sometimes I lose track, right? I don't check every single dashboard. So then, people reach out to me, they're like, hey, the data hasn't been updated. That's what happened recently. So we had this dashboard where, I didn't update the data for the entire July month. So someone reached out to me, hey, there's no update to the data. Why? Because the data source changed. Because I made some changes. I didn't fix the data source for the dashboard, right?
Right.
And you're like, okay, I'm gonna fix that issue, right? So these sort of things, just like day-to-day work, right?
Right.
Communication is an important thing, right? Communicating with different people, like stakeholders,
Yeah.
clients.
Yeah.
So that's something I spent a lot of time since I joined Decathlon, because you don't do that unless you work in industry. Even if you work in the industry, you're not the person who's communicating, right? It's always your boss.
Yeah.
You let your boss communicate and deal with stakeholders, you're not going to learn how to, present to stakeholder. Then you won't jump up the ladder. You're always going to be the boss, right?
Yeah.
So in my company, it's really nice. Like I tell my boss, like, hey, I want to learn how to communicate with stakeholders and clients. Can I do it myself? I don't want you to do it. I want to directly deal with the, supply team or so. Then I directly deal with them. So that's how I've like now in Decathlon, a lot of people didn't know before, like 6 months ago, or the first 6 months, a lot of people didn't know me. The other 6 months, the past 6 months, now a lot of people know me. Why? Because I directly communicate with them, right? And I
Right.
ask them. I visit to stores, I visit to the Decathlon stores, I speak to the store leader. And when you go there, if you tell them you're from the data team, everyone will come to you. Like, hey, I want
Oh.
this, I want this. That's what happens,
Yeah.
right?
Feel you.
Then a lot of people would know you, a lot of people see the work that you're doing, and they'll reach out to you and they'll ask you
Right.
for stuff. So that's how you can generate, like, bring value to business, right? So yeah, so it's a lot of things that I've learned in just a year and a half being in industry. So
Wow,
yeah.
that's pretty interesting, especially when you mention about the communication side. I feel like the data scientist, your communication needs to be on point. And also that also helps you out, also develop your communication skills, understand the requirements of the project and all that. That's very, very key as well.
Yeah, and you do less machine learning, like
Right.
once you start doing all those things, either you have two options, right? A, you want to jump up a ladder. B, you want to stay where you are and just keep on doing technical stuff, right? But then, you will never jump up a ladder because you're just
Right.
focusing on technical stuff. You're not actually
Right.
understanding the, right?
Right.
Or, let go of a little bit technical stuff, right? Start understanding the business, talk in the language of business, and jump up a ladder, right?
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
option. And that's
Yeah.
so I do less machine learning than I used to.
Right.
I know I only do time series. I do a little bit computer vision. We also have a whole computer vision where it's only me and my boss who does it. And so I do less technical, more sort of try and understand the business and how I can bring value to it. Right.
Interesting. Interesting.
And
Oh,
again,
yeah,
the
great to
reason I
know.
do that is because we started this podcast with me, Ashit, and Shashank, right? And
Right.
trying to convert this into sort of a long-term thing where it's we could take on freelancing projects where we can teach other people how to how is data, train them for data science, right? Not just from technical side, but from also from the business perspective, right?
Exactly.
So
Exactly. And I really like what you're doing, guys, because also, as you say, the business side is also important. The domain knowledge is also important. I always say you cannot do data without understanding the domain because that data is from a specific domain. So you need to have an idea. an idea to. So I really applaud you guys what you're doing, and keep it up. And I know we are running out of time, but just one last question, either for Ashit or Sushan here. So, I know India right now is big, right? It's definitely the biggest country in the world right now. And where these people, I would say, where's these people, there's data, right? What is the current, I would say, ongoing and current opportunities that you're seeing in India that many companies, let's say those big companies in India, let's say Flipkart and all that, are not really taking advantage of? Those are like, what are those small opportunities that, let's say, a fresher from school might come up an idea with and then utilize data science to solve a problem that is specific to India that the big companies in India are not tackling?
So I think the small so most of the transactions used to happen offline before COVID, right?
Right.
So
right.
mostly in cash, right? So these transactions did not get recorded anywhere, right? But after COVID, most of the people have moved on to like online mode of transaction. So that is UPI. Do you know what is UPI?
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so UPI and net banking. So even all like small shops, small vendors, everyone accepts UPI these days, right? So this data, uh, so uh, if you can find out what people are spending on, right? So you can literally figure out the everything about the whole economy, right? Uh, so I don't think this data is available, like consolidated data is available anywhere. So I don't know how they can leverage this. But yeah, so like something like this, if one can get their hands on it, this will be like very big.
Yeah, it will bring much more. So the company that usually do that, they don't see the value in that, or maybe they don't have the know-how, or what do you think is the challenge here?
So,
So
yeah,
Mhm.
continue.
yeah, please, yeah.
So currently there's a lot of more problem which like most of the companies faces, like they have to. So if I talk about my company works is like India's biggest company, and they have like much more problem to solve compared to these machine learning and data problem, because they are currently moving towards in IT business. Previously they are in more towards chemical and petrochemical industries, so they started moving towards that. So they have much more priority problem to solve. So right now they are working on that. Apart from that, like when you moved, so most of the business in India works on basis of how they can impact the PNL basically. And if you talk about the data business, it takes some time to impact it. Like if you talk about data science, and if you talk about, let's say, talk about any LLM, let's say chat GPT, it takes years to train. Okay, let's say take GPT 1 came, 2 came, and 3 came. After that, it become very much popular. But mostly the mindset of these right now, the current industrialist or businessman in India is like they need quick money from that. So these are one few problems. This also changes, like if you talk about the internet, the revolution of internet which happened in India a few years back, where the data become very quite cheaper, like the data packs become quite cheaper. Uh, but that requires someone, a mad guy who has a lot of money and just to came in and to prioritize this. So that's
Right.
so
Interesting. I like what you just say right there. That the fact that also the internet got so easy, and that creates more data. Yeah, but I hope people will take conscious of that and then actually start utilizing that transactional data, because I feel like that will bring so much opportunities, because as I see where there's a big population and people are not taking advantage of the data that the population is producing. I feel like it's just a waste of resources as well.
So I
It's
feel like
not like
So it's not like anyone has access to that data, right? So like your transactions are done by bank accounts. So
Right.
only the banks have that data. So they probably can't give that access to any company, right? So that is against the regulations.
You guys don't have this system called open banking. Actually, I'm not sure if Mitoli have heard about it. It's this open banking where actually third-party companies will be required by some law. The bank will be required to provide some of those transactional data as well, actually by law. So I guess that would be something. If it happens in India, that would be something pretty great, so that also normal people can take advantage of it.
so answer is quite similar to that only, previous one answer only.
Mm,
Because if you think about the banking sector in India, if you talk about 7 8 year back, they were mostly very few banks are connected to that internet part, and like lots of banks are in villages and all. So they mostly the
right.
transaction happens on the paper only. So then they move to, so these things are like most the transition happens in cash, as already as it told. So after
so
the COVID, these things are now moving toward digital, but still there is a lot of things. So maybe slowly we will move toward that. And we are not using much data. We are using a lot of data in different field, but yeah, in like if you talk about at a country level, we are not. At a companies level, we are using a lot of data, but at country level, we are not.
I
to,
see what you
to
mean.
explain you a little bit, Stern, so you know how here, there's always a record for every single thing. Anything that you hear, even if it's, let's say, a traffic police catching you, they actually put into a record, right? So they
Yeah.
have a record of everything. Whereas in India, because the internet era came in pretty late, right? And also companies, everything happening, manually, and also, it's cash, it's all paperwork and so on and so forth, right? So there were
Right.
no sort of way of keeping track of the data and everything. But now, since India is moving towards digital, everything is being recorded, right? So for instance, here, right, health, we know here that health, there's a tons and tons of amount of health data. Why? Because
Right.
time we go and see the doctor, doctor is putting things into the computer, right? So there's a record for it. Whereas in India, if you go and visit a doctor, the doctor doesn't even have a computer to put stuff in.
Yeah.
If you have a fever, if you go to a doctor here, there's literally a record. Even if you have a
Yeah.
fever, they'll put it in, right? Whereas in
Yeah.
India,
That's true.
fever, you go there, they'll give you some tablets and done. There's no record. So now everything is transforming, right? I saw a couple of startups in Bangalore, just specifically focused on, recording health data. So they are now, connecting with doctors, and, they're trying to see if we can, collect all the health data related to customers. So the customers can go to any doctors, and all doctors would have access to the patients, let's say, the data, right? So that's what's happening there. But we all learned, right, that anything that we want to do, we need data for it. And collecting data, that's takes more time than actually analyzing it, right?
Right.
I think going forward, maybe in the next 10 years, I think there's going to be a huge opportunities in India, because by then there's going to be tons of data that become available, right? So it's like the trend always comes later in India than other countries, because other countries are digitalized, right? Whereas India is now getting digitalized, right? So
Right. Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. That actually reminds me of because I did study in Kenya. So literally was the same thing that happened. So they literally jumped that wagon of adopting credit cards. So they went from just internet, and then they jump into using mobile banking, and then everything is transacted through phones, right? Even feature phone, you can still send money. I feel like in those emerging countries, that's where there's all the opportunities. So I'm really looking forward for where it will be in the next few years in India. Yeah.
Okay, I think we don't have any questions and we're a little bit outside time. So yeah, I'll call it a day. Well, thank you very
Yeah.
much for joining. It was a real pleasure talking to you and learning a lot about, not just about airline industry, but also in general about data science and about you. So yeah, thank you very much for joining. And yeah, we'll put this on YouTube and I can send you a link once we have it
Right.
on YouTube.
Sounds
Um,
good. Yeah, thank you so much, Mitul, for having me, for inviting me, and it was a pleasure to meet Ashit and also Sushan as well. Thank you so much, and yeah, looking forward for next time. If you wanna talk about it, I'll be glad to get to come over as well.
yeah, for sure.
Thanks,
Okay.
Tan.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll see you everyone. So we'll catch up. So actually you can
All right.
stop the recording, I think. Yeah. Alrighty.